Complete destruction reigned everywhere. Davy Sloane surveyed the damage with an icy gaze. What did this mean to her now? Straightening up, she wiped the blood from the corner of her mouth with the back of her hand, stepping over the prostrate body that still lay on the wet floor among broken glass and broken furniture. Making a feeble attempt to straighten her torn clothes and brush her tousled raven-black hair out of her face, she strutted up to the bar, wearing one broken heel. "Damn it, Davy, what's gotten into you?" asked the man to her left, taking a step back. She looked him up and down with a murderous look. Dear," another voice timidly continued. "I think Sam is hurt." It was true. Samara Gray lay prone, whimpering, in the center of the bar floor. She didn't look like she was going to get up anytime soon, which suited Davy just fine. "Forget about that bitch," she growled, turning her gaze back to the astonished man behind the bar. "Give me a drink." "Are you going to call the police, Charlie?" a drunken voice said indistinctly. "No," Charlie Wells laughed, pouring 3 fingers of his best Kentucky whiskey and sipping it to Davy. "This was a fight I would pay good money to watch. Damn, girl, you're damn good. I didn't know you had it in you. Do you feel better now?" Davy took the glass, staring at the amber liquid inside. Did she feel better? "Not yet," she said, taking a sip of the fiery liquid. "But I'm working on it." Grabbing the torn strap that hung from the large hole in her blouse, Davy pulled up the bra cup that threatened to expose too much of her breasts. Voices around her began to buzz, as they do when something impressive happens. "I always thought she was such a sweet, shy little thing," one woman said. Davy knew that everyone was always thinking about her. Sweet, timid, defenseless, a real weakling. But they had no idea about the emotions that were always bubbling beneath the surface, or how she had been taught her entire life to control them. Not once, since her earliest childhood, had she unleashed the rage of which she was capable. Still no. As good as it felt to break that woman's nose, Davy still felt ashamed that she couldn't control her rage. Her grandmother would be so disappointed in her. Raising the glass to her lips again, she downed the remaining contents in one gulp before tossing it back onto the bar. "Pour me another one." Still chuckling, Charlie poured a generous amount of bourbon into the glass. "Better go easy on this," he said. "You're not a drinker." "I'm thinking about taking this up as a hobby," she snapped, grabbing the drink. Taking another sip, she let the whiskey linger in her mouth, killing the taste of blood before swallowing. The whiskey burned in her empty stomach, adding to the fire of rage she felt in her chest. How did this mess start? Staring at her glass again, she thought back to her years of marriage. Grandma tried to warn her, but she just didn't listen. Any man named Philander is trouble. My grandmother was right, she thought. Phil proved this within weeks of their wedding vows. It was then that she learned about his first novelle. Honestly, it was a one-night stand, but that reality only made the event even more painful. He went and fucked some woman just because he could. There were no emotions behind this, only lust for the bitch he met in passing. There were others, too. Oh, he promised, after she found out about the first one, that he would never do it again, but she always knew when he cheated on her with some slut. She kept her shame to herself, not telling a single living soul. It would be too painful to admit that she had made a mistake. It was this stubborn pride that made her hold her head high and turn a blind eye to Phil's infidelity, even when the whole town was talking about it. That is, to Samara. Sam had been her best friend since first grade. It was Sam who held her hand through the long nights of mourning after Davy's parents died in the fire that burned their home to the ground. It was Sam with whom she shared all the joys and sorrows in the girl's life. In some ways, Sam's betrayal was much worse than what Phil did. Phil began to show little unconscious signs that he was fooling around again. It was only 4 weeks before she realized he was cheating again, and this time, it wasn't just a fling. She tried to ignore it at first, hoping it would pass quickly like everything else. It soon became apparent that Phil was involved on some emotional level. When she finally tried to talk to him about it, he became belligerent, even violent. He accused her of going crazy, imagining things that didn't actually happen. She tried to ignore it again, but the whispers of the people around her were unbearable. When Davy couldn't take it anymore, she started spying on him. She followed him when he went out at night, showed up at his office unannounced, and checked his mobile phone for suspicious numbers. He covered his tracks well. Her nerves frayed. She accepted her aunt's invitation to spend the weekend at the lake house with her family. As always, Samara was also invited. This was the first time Sam turned down the opportunity to soak in the water and work on her tan in front of Davy's hot cousins. This should have been her first clue. Taking another sip from her glass, she glanced at her reflection in the mirror behind the bar. Her mouth was swollen from Sam's good punch, and bright red scratches were visible on one side of her face. What was left of her blouse was unbuttoned, revealing the torn lace of her bra and the marks of Sam's fingernails. Her usually well-groomed hair was in such a mess that no amount of combing could fix it. They fell in dirty waves onto her shoulders and down her back. Pulling out a tangled tuft of her own hair from her blouse, Davy threw it on the floor in disgust. It was then that she noticed that the once white ankle-length skirt she was wearing was torn from the hem to the waist along one thigh. She shrugged and went back to her drink. Movement in the mirror caught her attention. Someone helped Sam up from the floor, sitting her on a chair. After draining her glass, Davy turned to face her former best friend. "You broke my nose, bitch!" a woman shouted from the other end of the room. Davy smiled at her, a cold grimace belying the burning hatred that settled in her soul. She wanted to break more than just Sam's nose. She returned home earlier than she should have after her weekend at the lake. It rained all night, and was still raining this morning when she decided to return home. It was early afternoon when she pulled into the driveway to find Sam's car in her parking space. Davy's blood froze the minute she saw this. Shock took over her senses, freezing her ass to the car seat and her fingers to the steering wheel. The world seemed to be spinning in slow motion when she finally managed to get out of the car. She didn't remember thinking any thoughts when she found herself tiptoeing across the yard to her bedroom window. The rain had stopped, but the ground was soft and wet, sucking the small heels of her shoes into the mud. Wet, uncut grass clung to her ankles as she approached, soaking the hem of her skirt. She remembered that clearly. The sight that awaited her on the other side of the glass was enough to send a shiver through her stomach, like an earthquake. Her husband and best friend were pleasing each other, and her husband had never given such caresses to Devi. Opening the window, Davy heard Sam's screams. Her best friend was thoroughly enjoying her husband. Phil stopped pleasing the mewling Sam, laughing loudly as the blonde underneath him cursed furiously. Then he moved on to serious sex. From her vantage point, Davy could see everything from the way her old friend's back arched and the expression on her face as she begged for more to the smirk of her own husband. It was hard sex. Throwing his head back, her husband growled roughly. It was very different from their cool copulations. He never showed the passion for her that he showed for the woman Davy trusted most in her life. This realization alone was enough to bring her anger to the surface, but she kept it in check. The scene in the bedroom was like a train wreck, mesmerizing in its horror. This delighted her, making her stare at his depravity. "I bet Davy will never let you do that," Sam giggled. "She's not worth a pimple on your ass, baby," Phil growled back. "She's as funny in bed as a dead fish." They laughed together, grunting as he worked tirelessly on her, having dirty sex. These words, this laughter, hurt as much as the betrayal. That's when the rage bubbled to the surface. That's when Davy allowed her anger to boil over. She went to the garage behind the house and took some paint from the shelf inside. She then got to work on Sam's brand new silver Camaro. After she spray-painted the words hooker and slut on the sides, hood, and windshield of the car, she used a hammer from Phil's treasured toolbox to break the headlights and glass. After that, she got into her car and drove aimlessly for several hours, seething with the hot anger that was still seething inside her. She was always a good girl, always did what was expected of her. Even the clothes she wore were strict and correct. Glancing in the rearview mirror, she saw a beautiful white ribbon holding her raven hair out of her face. She grabbed it in disgust, tearing it off her head, letting her black hair fall over her shoulders and down her chest. The ribbon fell onto the seat in a small pile of shimmering satin. Her wandering path led her to Charlie's bar, where she saw an angry Samara walking through the door. It was pure impulse that caused Davy to turn the wheel and slam on the brakes to slide sideways into the parking lot. She practically ripped the keys out of the ignition, throwing them on the seat as she parked next to Samara's slut mobile. Standing near her car, she raged internally, looking at the building. It was pure impulse that made her grab the ribbon from the seat again, using it to tie her long hair into a ponytail to keep it out of the way. She then walked through the same entrance as Sam. Slamming the bar door behind her, she attracted the attention of the small crowd inside. "You're a fucking bitch!" Sam screamed when she saw Davy standing there, her eyes blazing in her sinister rage. "You will pay for the damage you caused to my car." "What damage, Samara?" Davy asked quietly, throwing back her ponytail and slowly approaching her enemy. "What price should we put on the head of a two-faced friend who will have sex with my husband? What's the price for dirtying the sheets of my bed with my man? How much would you pay to break up your marriage?" Samara, with a blazing red face, looked at the cheerful, curious looks of the quiet people around her. She began sidling toward the door, sidestepping Davy as she moved toward the middle of the room. "I don't know what the hell you're talking about. I was at your house to talk to Phil because he's worried about you. This is all. He thinks you're going crazy, and I'm starting to believe him." Undaunted, Davy continued her slow approach, keeping herself between her husband's slut and the door. "That's a good try, Sam. Maybe next time you have sex with someone else's husband, you'll remember to close the curtains. I saw it all, right down to how you like to take someone else's male instrument in the place where you are sitting." Davy looked over her shoulder at the grinning bar patrons. "Who among you here didn't know that this slut loves such entertainment?" she asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. "If you haven't done it yet, give it a try. From what I saw, my husband was having a damn good time." There was a collective gasp from the men and women surrounding the bar, followed by vulgar chuckles and jeers directed at Sam. "How dare you?" Sam hissed unconvincingly. I should sue you for libel. It's pretty hard to prove a slander when the whole town knows. I'm telling the truth, slut. They've been talking about this for weeks. I'm stupid. I didn't want to believe it. I just thought they were all lying. I mean, after all, my best friend would never do something like that to me, but then I saw it myself. Slut. "Davy, stay away from me," Sam muttered, taking a step back. "Oh no, you'll take your punishment like a big girl, sweetie. I'm going to beat you up." With that, Davy lunged at her old friend, grabbing the front of her cropped t-shirt and connecting her right fist to Sam's eye. The woman screamed and staggered back, calling for help. No one in the bar moved. Several of the people occupying the tables stood up to join the others at the counter and watch the spectacle. "No one will help you, Sam." Samara looked truly scared. She looked around, but her only escape was cut off by Davy. The humiliation of what happened in front of the entire bar was more than she could bear. "Hey," she objected, her mouth curling into a grin. "It's not my fault that you can't satisfy your husband. Maybe if you stopped trying to be such a good girl all the time, he'd be home having sex with you instead of me, bitch. You got me, Sam. He fooled around all 3 years of our marriage. Imagine how lucky he must be to finally get his hands on you. But then, it probably wasn't too difficult for him, huh? After all, you've slept with half the men in the area," Davy retorted, looking over her shoulder at the bar. "Should I start naming all the men in this room who fucked you?" Sam cringed. The men turned pale. Several wives thought. "Let's see how the hands go up, guys. Only married people," Davy continued. "How many of you guys have fucked this slut?" It was Sam's turn to pounce on her opponent, and she did it with her claws drawn. She grabbed Davy by her long hair, tearing off the ribbon, and pulled her around until Davy hit her in the stomach. Sam fell, letting go of Davy's hair, clutching her stomach and gasping for air. Davy lunged forward, landing in the middle of Sam's body as her shirt rode up around her waist, pummeling the woman with her fists. From afar, Davy could hear the cheers of the crowd. She knew that she was creating a real show, but for the first time in her life, she did not care. She beat Sam for every time someone took advantage of her good nature, for every time she believed in someone, only to have her heart broken again. Every blow dealt to the slut came from times when Davy reluctantly confirmed her friend's alibi, lied for her, and defended her only because that's what friends do. She stopped to catch her breath, exhaustion wearing on her. That's when Sam managed to hit Davy back with the edge of her hand. Davy was thrown back and landed on her back, her skirt riding up around her hips. The slut was on top of her in an instant, claws clinging to her face, tearing her hair and clothes. Davy felt no pain, even when Sam grabbed her left breast, twisting it wildly. The crowd loved the maneuver and cheered and applauded as Sam squealed. Davy threw her aside as if she weighed nothing, jumping to her feet. She narrowed her eyes, spitting blood from her mouth as she looked at her former best friend. Sam jumped to her feet, placing the table between herself and Davy. She jumped back as if she had been burned when Davy grabbed the corner of the table, throwing it aside. "Get back here, bitch," Davy growled, as the woman turned to run. Grabbing a lock of blonde hair, Davy quickly wrapped it around her wrist, yanking Sam to take the brunt of her rage in the form of a punch to the nose. Davy felt the crunch of bone even before she heard it, and it gave her a satisfied feeling of retribution. Sam's claws flashed again, causing Davy to loosen her grip on her wheaten locks. That done, she planted her foot on Sam's ass and kicked her, sending her flying face first. A chair standing in her way shattered into pieces, leaving the slut face down on the beer-stained floor. "Get up!" Devi roared, throwing scattered chairs aside in her haste to grab Samara. Jumping to her feet again, Sam reached for a glass on a nearby table, splashing its contents in Davy's face. Next was a glass of beer. The burning liquid got into Davy's dark eyes, running down her face and onto her clothes. She had to smile when Sam screamed just before throwing the mug at her head. Davy deflected the heavy glass with her forearm, hearing the sound of glass breaking on the floor. Sam pushed the chair at her, hitting her shins just below the knees. Davy didn't feel it. She picked up the chair and threw it past Sam as the woman screamed again. "I'm done joking," Davy growled, rushing toward the woman she once considered her sister. She threw Sam across the table, watching with delicious joy as the slut fell on the other side. Pushing the table out of the way, Davy landed on top of her. Clasping her hands together, she threw them over her shoulder and brought them down to hit Sam in the side of the face. This was the end for Sam. She grunted once, her eyelids drooping over her bloodshot eyes. Her body relaxed under Davy, unconscious and completely defenseless. For a moment, Davy had an almost irresistible urge to grab a shard of broken glass from the floor and use it to destroy what was left of Sam's face. She fought it, desperately swallowing the stale air around her in an attempt to control her dark rage. Finally, she pulled away from the lying woman. Samara moaned quietly, the only sign that there was still life left in this bitch. She lay at Davy's feet, her dirty shorts open at the fly, and her ruined t-shirt pulled up around her neck. Now, as she stood in the bar, listening to the incessant whining of the woman who had betrayed her, the one she had called friend for so long, she wanted nothing more than to erase the last years of her life. She wanted to end this city and all its inhabitants. She wanted to be free. "Do you want more?" "What?" Davy muttered, lost in her thoughts. "No, Charlie, sorry about the mess. Do not worry about it. We haven't had a fight like this here since the girls from Las Vegas came to town." She heard the men around them chuckle, but the humor was lost on her. Sam was still sitting in the center of the room, complaining about her face and threatening to sue. If the woman was hoping to arouse sympathy, there were few in the bar who sympathized with her. Davy had to smile at that. Sam always liked to be the center of attention. When the door opened, silence reigned in the room. All heads turned to see a man enter, his eyes searching the dim darkness of Davy's bar. His breath hissed through his teeth when he saw her condition. "Sean! Oh, thank God!" Sam exclaimed. Look what she did to me." But Sean didn't see her. He walked straight towards Davy, reaching out his hand to her shoulder. Phil called and said, "You're crazy, honey. Are you okay?" "Why are you here?" she asked. Good old Sean. He was a true friend for many years. She and Phil had been hanging out together since high school, but when Davy and Phil got married, he turned out to be a better friend to Davy than his old buddy. "I saw your car in the parking lot. I've been looking for you ever since Phil called. Did you do this with Samara's Camaro?" "Yes," she answered, her eyes sparkling. She nodded her head towards the center of the room. "I also beat the crap out of that bitch." "I can see that," he laughed, casting a sidelong glance at the whimpering Sam. "So you finally found out, right?" Giving him a withering look, she motioned for Charlie to pour him another drink. "So I'm the only one too dumb to see, huh?" "Yes, I saw the two of them through the bedroom window, having dirty sex." "Oh, sorry, Dev. I wanted to tell you, but I wouldn't listen," she finished for him. "I would probably kick you out of my house with a kick in the ass. Why did you put up with his crap for so long?" "He's my husband," she answered simply, shrugging her shoulders. "You deserve better, Dev," he offered. Looking into his eyes, she saw the seriousness of his words and maybe a little more. Was it regret she saw? Regret? What? When I married him, I thought he was the best. I'm probably just an idiot. "No, honey. You just didn't see his shortcomings, but saw what he didn't have," Sean said quietly, brushing a stray strand of her hair back. "He never deserved you. Why don't you let me take you home so you can get cleaned up?" She opened her mouth to speak, but the door opened again. This time, Phil crossed the threshold. The people around them froze, some with their drinks raised halfway to their faces. He looked angry as hell as he stomped towards her and Sean, glaring at his friend as if the man was intruding. "Thanks for finding her," Phil snapped. "Now you can go. I think Davy is tired of you," Sean said quietly. "You better get away from my wife, asshole." "This concerns only her and me." Sean took a step forward, standing face to face with Davy's husband. The crowd was like a pack of hungry dogs waiting to be fed. "What the hell am I, a piece of meat?" Davy screamed. "You two are picking at my bones like a pair of vultures?" "Jesus. Sean, you're a sweet guy, but I don't need you to fight my battles. Besides, Phil is right. This is between us." She stood between the men, placing her bloody hand on her husband's shoulder. "Why, Phil? I too could be loved by you. Why don't you want me like you want everyone else? Davy, I'll take you home now." "What the hell were you thinking?" "Nobody pays attention to me," Sam interrupted from her chair in the center of the room. "I'm just sitting here bleeding to death." Rolling her eyes, Davy walked towards the beaten woman, stopping a few steps away to grin wickedly as Samara flinched. Bending down, Davy picked up her dirty, wet tape from the floor. She walked back slowly, taking Phil's hand to pull him away from the others. "I think we should talk in private, Phil. I want to get this matter sorted out." He started to pull her towards the exit, but was stopped by a grinning Davy. "Here and now, I want to do something indecent with you," she said, pulling him with her into the men's room. Looking over her shoulder, she winked obscenely at Sean. He looked angry, his fists were clenched, and he had an expression of extreme disgust on his face. "I know what you think you saw, honey," Phil began as she turned and pressed her fingers to his lips, softly reassuring him. "It is done. Let's just forget about it, dear," she said in a soft and hoarse voice. "I want to show you that I can do everything these other women do for you. I want you to know that you don't have to go anywhere to get what you need." Walking into the stall, she could see the shock on his face as she pulled him closer, wrapping her arms around his neck and inhaling the aroma of the soap. At least he took a shower, she thought, running her lips along his chin. She ran the fingers of one hand down his chest, and with the other hand, she reached back to lower the toilet lid. She lowered her ass, sitting so that her face was level with his belt buckle. Licking her swollen lips, she looked up into his face, smiling what she hoped was a seductive smile, and slowly unzipped his fly. "There's something I could do for you, baby," she whispered. God, Davy, you make me excited. Fine, this is how I want you. Hard and ready for me. Close eyes. Mom will give you something. She pulled his jeans down just enough to get inside his boxers, watching as his eyes closed and his head fell back. Wrapping her fingers around his tool, she gently stroked it, feeling it swell with arousal. That's it, baby, Phil groaned. Don't tease me. Just keep your eyes closed, love, she replied, squeezing a little harder. I'm going to make you feel like this. The memory of his morning intercourse with Sam flashed before her eyes, and this angered her even more. If he really thought that after that she was ready to give him affection, then he was very mistaken. She had another thought. It was only a few minutes after she entered the tiny men's room with her husband that Davy emerged, alone. She giggled like a little girl, almost dancing as she looked back through the door she had left open. The look on Phil's face made her wish she had a camera. "Where is Sean?" she asked, not addressing anyone in particular, peering into the faces of those sitting at the bar. "He muttered something about stupid women and walked out the door," Charlie answered, pointing to the door. She heard loud laughter behind her. One of the regulars laughed out loud, pointing to the men's room. He turned to her, wiping tears from his eyes. "I'll get it back for you," the man shouted cheerfully, turning to run out the door. Other visitors gathered to see what had Mike Tompkins so amused. Soon the whole bar was roaring with laughter, and soon Mikey returned with scene in tow. One look through the toilet door, and Sean was grinning, raising an eyebrow at her. "He thought I would let him put that nasty thing back into my body," she shrugged. He thought a quick shower would make him completely clean. With a smug smile, Sean looked down at her dirty hair ribbon, one end of which was tied around the base of Phil's swollen tool. The other end was tied to the water pipe under the sink in such a way that Phil could not reach it without bending over and causing himself even more pain. There wasn't enough room in the rope for him to reach the sink. Even if he could, he would never be able to untangle the knots in the wet fabric. She tied him up like a naughty dog. "Davy, what did you do?" Sean asked, still laughing at the turn of events. "I taught him a much-needed lesson." "Come back, honey," Phil whined, wincing in pain. "Let's just talk about it." "I've had enough talk, you bastard. I'm done with you and your filth and stench." "Davy, please," he begged, gripping the edges of the shell as his tool continued to swell. "Please? Please what, Philander? Please forgive you? Please let me go? Please let me keep your instrument with you? Fuck you." She laughed again before adding, "You better get out of this and go to the hospital if you don't want this thing to fall off." Before he could answer, she turned away, taking Sean's hand. "You know, you were ready to fight one of your oldest friends because of me." "Why?" "Why?" he asked, gently running his fingers over her face. "Haven't you realized this yet? Maybe I don't quite understand, but a woman likes it when people say it, Sean. Because you are you. Because ever since we were kids, I've been in love with you, waiting for you to notice. But then you married Phil. I wish this didn't happen." His voice faded, his eyes searching for her understanding. She answered him with a mischievous smile. "So, what were you saying about taking me home to get cleaned up? Will this be your house or mine?" "Mine, doll. I never want you to go back to his house." She looked back and saw that Phil was still groaning in pain, desperately trying to stay on his feet. "Darling," she called him, "do not wait for me. I won't be home, ever." Taking Scene's hand, she walked with him to the exit, shouting over her shoulder to Charlie to take care of her car. The bar owner simply waved her off as he carried a large knife into the men's room and chuckled at the day's events. She winked at him and turned back to Sean, wondering how she had managed not to see the love that shone in his eyes before. They walked out together towards the setting sun. Perhaps the day was coming to an end, but for Davy it all seemed completely new freedom and new life. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.